And of course, whoever was the congressman of that particular district was a real powerhouse. And Richard J. Daley probably would not have been mayor of the city of Chicago had it not been for the support of the late Congressman Bill Dawson. Well, we have his great nephew here with us. And he has not only studied political science for obvious reasons, but also he's made it a field of endeavor. And he's written a book. As a matter of fact, he's written several books. But the book that we're going to be dealing with, he'll introduce it today. But before we get too deep into the discussion on the specific questions that he will be addressing, I'd like for Dr. Michael C. Dawson to just tell us a little bit about himself so that we know that we're talking to a real human being that, although he's achieved this august position as a doctor in this whole area of political science and is well published and is a professor at the University of Chicago. There's some other things about him I'd like him to sort of share with our listening audience before we get into this matter. Doctor.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Finney. I'm all too human. My relatives will tell you that. My children will tell you that.
Okay.
I grew up on the south side of Chicago, went to high school and grade school on the south side of Chicago. Went to college when I was way too young, when I was 16, to the West Coast. I went to college just as the Vietnam War was getting even hotter in 1968. Right after the Democratic Convention in Chicago, which was notorious. My father ended up getting maced. Well, tear gas at the time.
In Grant Park?
In Grant Park, even though he was working for the Democratic Party at the time. He was
Loyal precinct captain.
exactly. Got involved in the black student movement in California. Was an organizer for probably about 10 to 12 years. Mm-hmm. And then went back to school in the 1980s, just in time for Ronald Reagan to announce that the fun times were over and it was time to move back to the 1950s. Since the 1980s, I'm a political scientist by training, but really what I do is black studies. That was my undergraduate major at Berkeley. I've been a member of black studies departments in different parts of the country. What I study is how to make our quest for social and racial justice, how can we take into the 21st century? Mm-hmm. And use the tools of political science mm-hmm. to think about our people.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the deal. You've written this great book that I have apologized that I didn't know about it long enough before this program, or else I would have completed the book. I'm about a third through it already. And it's called Not in Our Time. It's titled Not in Our Time. And I'd like for you to just give us an oversight or overview of what this book is all about. Now, everybody listen now, this is a real good doctor. So most of everything he says, he can back up with data. So there are no kind of off the top of his head assumptions about anything. So those of you who want to come on the air and talk about what you think and can't back it up, it ain't going to fly today. It'll fly next week when it just got me because I'm not got that database. But he is seriously a scholar in this whole area. But Dr. Dawson, please kind of give us an overview of the book.
The title, Not in Our Lifetimes, does actually come from data. We've been asking African Americans for over 20 years, when do you think black people will achieve racial equality in the United States? Most African Americans since in the 1990s have said either not in our lifetimes, the title of the book, or never. Now, that changed, and that was really 80% of black people at the time of Katrina in 2005 said not in our lifetimes or worse. We were totally despondent and pessimistic about the future of racial equality in the United States in 2005 after the Katrina disaster, but had been pessimistic since the 1990s. With the election of President Obama, there was a shift. About half of African Americans were now optimistic, but by 2010 we become pessimistic again. What I want to try to explain in the book, what I've tried to work on is try to show how black politics is weak, the consequences for the weakness of black politics, our inability to influence public policy, our inability to even to have our opinions respected in discourse with white Americans in particular, how we are isolated from white Americans because we see one thing in the world and they see another. For example, most white Americans, about 80%, believe that the aftermath of Katrina, the Bush administration's policy had nothing to do with race. But the great majority of black people said, yes, if the victims had been white, we would have seen a different type of response by the federal government. Most white people said that the reason people didn't leave New Orleans before the hurricane struck was because they were people in New Orleans were stubborn. I think quite sensibly, this is an opinion, but what most African Americans said is what I would have said, that most people who could not leave New Orleans, black or white, was because they were poor. They didn't have the resources to leave. There wasn't a public transportation. There wasn't a government organized evacuation. So we see two different worlds. And so what I've tried to understand, to explain, and tried to understand as well, is what can we do now? What will it take to bring back the black insurgencies that help not just black people at the bottom, which should be our focus, but also helped all of us. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for black people in the streets.
Well, Doc, before we get to the prescription, let's deal a little bit more about what happened.
Yes.
Take us back to before Katrina, because here's my problem. And let me say it straight up. All right, the problem is that we have assumed that racism is over in the United States of America. Is that true or not? Is the United States of America less racist now than it was in yesteryear? Or is race a factor anymore? Some people say that with the election of Barack Obama, ain't no racism out there at all. So how do we get into this?
3 out of 10 white people are willing to admit publicly to strangers that they know somebody, don't say who, but they know somebody who won't vote for a black person for president. Half of white people are willing to say, over half of white people are willing to say publicly, as of 1995, that black people are less intelligent than white people. Racism is alive and well in this country. It's alive institutionally in terms of how whether it's in the criminal justice system, in the economic system. We know that if you send a black person out with a resume, you send a white person out with exactly the same resume, it's much more likely that the black person won't get a job. Same thing in housing.
Well, the black person will not get the job.
Will not get the job, will not get the loan, will not be able to buy a house.
And so here's the deal then. So what if we, and did we elect Barack Obama president, or did somebody else elect him?
I thought we were a big part of how he got elected president.
Okay. So the bottom line is that if racism is still alive and well, how did Barack Obama get elected?
Well, Barack Obama got elected because he won no more white votes than any other Democratic president has recently. What happened was that black people came out in unprecedented numbers. Latinos came out for Barack Obama in unprecedented numbers. What people don't realize, Asian Americans came out for Barack Obama in unprecedented numbers. Combine that with a real fatigue among a few white Americans with former President Bush, and some white Americans, young white Americans, saying that it's time for a change. It's the combination of these powerful movements among people of color in the United States with a few white people that elected Barack Obama. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The problem is if people are discouraged now, well, if it only took a 1% shift in black turnout for North Carolina to flip in the other direction, mm-hmm. If people don't come out, we might not see the same result.
Right. So let me get it. So black folk helped put Barack Obama in. Latino or Hispanics helped put Barack Obama in, and a lot of white folk helped put Barack Obama in. That's how he won, right?
That's how he won.
So the bottom line is that one would be then led to believe, I think, that that Barack Obama is a product, if you will, and thereby obliged to the black community since he got elected, pretty much because blacks voted for him.
That's how the usual calculus is. If the people that elect you, your constituents, mm-hmm. you owe them something.
Right.
You're accountable to them, to be put in more democratic terms. But what we also forget, I think one of the reasons that we've been perhaps more apathetic than we should be, is that the president doesn't have as much power as we think he does. He's locked in by Senate, where he needs 60 votes. He's locked in by a House that since 2010 is governed by the opposition party. He has a Supreme Court that wants to repeal the key sections of the Voting Rights Act in the coming year. Particularly if we are mobilized to make demands like the Tea Party did, he is in a straitjacket.
Okay, now let's get back. Let's get real. So here's the deal: we've got a movement that was in place before Barack Obama ever got elected president. That movement started when, and to what degree can we assume that the black or the civil rights movement of Dr. Martin Luther King contributes to the kind of way that America or the United States of America was held in regard up through the year 1964?
Where it began, the modern civil rights movement, I think we forget, began right before World War I. Continued through the Marcus Garvey movement during World War I and afterwards in the Harlem Renaissance and the black radicals of New York City and Chicago. And through the 1930s and all the court cases that the NAACP brought before World War II. It continues through World War II with the victory against fascism, the victory against racism campaign that black newspapers like the Chicago Defender led. And then it started in the modern part that we remember, it started in the 1950s with bus boycotts, not just in Montgomery, but in Tampa and Baton Rouge as well earlier, and blossomed into the civil rights movement that we're now celebrating once again. Without that movement, we would not have Barack Obama as president. It taught people organizing skills. It transformed institutions, allowed people to get many more black people to get a much higher education. That movement put into place everything that led to the election of Barack Obama as president of the United States.
Let me quote something from your book, and Not in Our Lifetime. I contend that for democratic progressive movements to thrive in the United States, a healthy black politics is indispensable. How can you justify that?
Cause and effect. When I look at history, I see that every time that there's been social justice, whether it's a movement for economic equality, it's a movement for voting rights, black people have been into leadership. And more importantly, or as important, black people have been organized as black people, calling people out and saying, what happened to the agenda of black people? You can't talk about working people, you don't talk about black people. You can't talk about women's rights without talking about black women's rights. So every time we have moved forward in this country toward a more just society, we've had black people organized as black people, keeping people honest, keeping people real.
Well, so I think that what you would say in your book and now is that black people help make the United States or of America better, not only for themselves, but for everybody.
Absolutely. And that's been said, Dr. King said that several times. In fact, W.B. Du Bois said it as well, that black people function as a conscience of this country. We'll say the emperor has no clothes when the country goes down the wrong path, and will organize, or had at least until recently, would organize to correct and challenge injustice when it occurred, thus making life better for everybody, despite sometimes other people.
So let me get at that. So the point is that we have agitated since the First World War, and that's really what you're saying. Black people have been agitating for something all through the last, the 20th century, yes, if you will. And more often than not, it was for equality and justice. Am I right or wrong?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and it has been that agitation over the years, starting with roughly World War I, that obviously was the, I guess, the foundation, if you will, to the civil rights movement, and you know, guys like A. Philip Randolph, not only W.B. Du Bois, but others kind of got involved in the mix. And I guess what you're saying is that fight in that struggle for freedom for black folk that sort of spilled over into rights for, I guess, women. White women got to be women's suffrage and things like that happen around the same. Come work with me now.
That's exactly right. I mean, we have a housing project that I used to work at when I was a teenager called Ida B. Wells.
Oh, yes.
And Ida B. Wells fought for primarily to make sure that black people no longer get lynched in this country. But she also took on the women's suffrage movement and say, you're trying to have women's suffrage by having black women excluded, by having black men excluded. So she took on racist women in the suffrage movement for women's rights. At the same time, she was taking on racists who are trying to lynch black people, as she said, for doing well.
Okay, listen, this is Leon Finney, and we are having a lively discussion this afternoon with Dr. Michael C. Dawson. He is a professor of political science at the University of Chicago. He's an author of several books. The one that is hot right at this particular point is titled Not in Our Lifetime, and that's, I think that he's already said that many blacks and African Americans and colored to Negroes think that we will not be free and racism will not be eliminated in the United States of America in their lifetime. Well, that's a mouthful. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. This is Leon Finney, your host. Stick with us. And remember, our phone number is 773-591-1690. Hi, this is Leon Finney, your host on Another Perspective, WVON Talk Radio. We're with you here today with Dr. Michael C. Dawson. And this is the grandnephew of the late Congressman William Dawson, Bill Dawson, the man who was the most powerful political leader of his time that was of color anywhere in the United States of America. So powerful and influential that Bill Dawson was able to put not only mayors into office, but also members of Congress, members of the General Assembly, etc. He was a very, very powerful leader, and he was African American, and we celebrate, obviously, the kind of work that he did. And now we have his grandnephew with us, Dr. Michael C. Dawson, and he's written this book that is, I think, a must-read for those of you who are out there in the radio land. You might want to buy the book, Not in Our Lifetime. Not in Our Lifetime by Dr. Michael C. Dawson. But he's talking about this book right now, and I've pushed him a little bit, and I want to because he's so data-based, I want to make sure that we get as much of his insights based upon data and fact that we can get. And I just asked him, what's happened to the African-American political base here in the city of Chicago, given the fact that we've lost 180,000 African-Americans from the city of Chicago? What does that mean? And what I'd like for him to do is kind of talk about what's happened to us as subsequent, I guess, to 1964, or maybe even before, but certainly legalized segregation was pretty much abolished in 1964 or shortly thereafter. And so something has happened to us here where has integration worked for us, or has it worked against us? What is the impact of it? Obviously, Dr. King said we want to be able to live where we want to live and buy where we want to buy, but what has been the net effect of the opening of the doors and letting us off, if you will, of the reservation?
Well, I think we should talk about different types of desegregation. When we think about what's happened to our communities in terms of people moving out of them, it has really weakened our political base. We see our political organizations, the churches have suffered spiritually, and in terms of their membership, their ability to be able to empower political organizations and political campaigns. Political organizations themselves, like the Second Ward Democratic Organization, used to be a powerhouse.
Oh, I remember that.
I lived with it every night.
Right.
But it's, those type of political ward organizations are nowhere near as strong as they used to be. We don't have the precinct captains organized the same way. We don't have the block clubs the way we used to. Mm-hmm. So the sort of political we used to have black union caucuses on the south side of Chicago, connected to all sorts of industries that are no longer there. We could say some of it was due to desegregation, certainly. Some of it also was due, I think, as you mentioned during the break, to the disinvestment. Mm-hmm. As jobs left the south side, at the west side, so did people following those jobs as well, whether it was outside the city or to the suburbs themselves. Mm-hmm. So we're much weaker organizationally, much less able then to go to the political leaders in the city and say, don't close our schools. It's much harder to make that demand now.
Because we don't have the clout.
We don't have the clout. And, I grew up in a household where clout was everything. And clout was the way we counted clout in my household was how many people could you turn out to vote.
Right.
That was a hard currency.
Right.
We will bring people to vote against you if you do not respond to our demands. You don't have to like us, but you have to be able to accountable to us
And respect us.
and respect us.
And so what we have now is, let me just kind of track this down. So therefore, if I can extrapolate,
Yes.
so that means that our black political organizations are no longer as effective as they once were
Much
to
weaker.
demand accountability from whoever was elected, even if they were black.
Yes.
It means that our African American churches and church leaders are no longer able to have the kind of large base of African Americans in their congregation that would also demand respect. It means that the block clubs and civic organizations no longer have the strength that they once had to hold aldermen and councilmen accountable. It means that in many instances the merchants have dried up. I was out driving the other day trying to count the African American businesses as I drove up and down Cottage Grove, and I could barely get 5 African American owned businesses that were open on Cottage Grove from 60th Street on the north all the way to 79th Street. Now and I remember that Cottage Grove was a thriving business community. And if you want to look at 63rd Street, which is my home-based street, from Stony Island all the way to State Street, you could fire a cannon down 63rd Street in the broad daylight, and you couldn't probably hit 20 merchants that were shoppers and consumers buying anything because there's no business there.
There's no business. 47th Street, 63rd Street. Stony Island, which is a street I used to go up and down as a kid. We see black businesses have been decimated, and people can't get jobs, and people can't buy what they need, they'll move.
Okay.
But the other thing that's happened too with the churches is that sometimes we still have large churches, but we sort of separation between the community where the church is located and where the people come from.
Yeah.
We have commuter churches too. So people are driving in. They're not facing the problems of the people in the neighborhood.
There is not one mega church that I know of, and I am a church person. Spent a lot of time studying the black church and wrote my dissertation on the black church and what to do about the leadership. But I can assert to you that there's not one so-called mega church that at this particular day in our history that does not draw 70% of its attending and tithing members from outside of the city of Chicago. And that's not the way it was at one time, which means that even when you look at the politics, there was once a period of time when you said, okay, fine. You had Mount Pisgah, and you had Olivet, and you had my church, Metropolitan, and you had Quinn Chapel, and I just kind of called and Pilgrim, just in the first congressional district, they were real powerhouses. And the membership and Tabernacle over there with Rawls, they were real powerhouses in the 2nd Ward, the 3rd Ward, the 4th Ward, and the 20th Ward. They were real powerhouse churches, and when those ministers talked, they were listened to, and whoever was elected, be they alderman or a mayor, they had to deal with them. Now those churches are seriously weakened.
Well, I used to be a young organizer in Oakland, California, and even though we were young radicals, we went with the politicians and anybody else. If you want to work in this community, we talked to the Baptist Alliance, we talked to the Methodist Alliance, we talked to the independent churches. And we seriously respected those congregations, those ministers, and they delivered.
So what do we do?
That's the hard part. One thing we have to do is educate our young people better, and that's part of my responsibility, I know, but it's the responsibility of all of us. I was talking to some ministers this morning, and they were asking, who is Harriet Tubman? And they looked at the textbook that was being used and said, Harriet Tubman was a great woman. They didn't say anything about what she did, nothing about how she fought slavery, nothing about how she brought people out of the South. She was just an energetic woman, is what the textbook said. So we have to educate our children. I was like I said, in California in the 1970s and 1980s. One of my professors, a black professor in Oakland, California, Finney Jr. College, told me that when he was teaching in the LA public schools, most of the black children in 1979 did not know who Martin Luther King was in the public schools.
In 1979?
Less than a decade after only a decade after assassination.
Well, I would be interested to know if they knew it now, and this is the year 2011.
Exactly. So, and even when people do remember Dr. King, they don't remember the Dr. King of 1967 and 1968 of the Poor People's Movement, of the anti-war movement, who said that we have to bring justice to this, and we have to work on behalf of those who are least able to help themselves. So we have this sanitized version of Dr. King that wasn't about the type of taking the hard moral stance.
Yeah, you take you have an interesting take on Dr. King, that more as a radical and more as a militant and more less compromising than I think that modern day, the post-civil rights era, if you will, people would characterize him.
Dr. King was pragmatic in the sense that he wanted to achieve results, and that's what we have to do in this world. But at the same time, he wouldn't compromise on a moral stance. He would always bring the moral issue to the fore, and he always was about those who were most disadvantaged. As we started winning victories around the Civil Rights, the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 64 and 65, he said, he started saying, well, who needs my help now? It was janitors in Memphis. It was poor people. That's why he wanted to occupy the mall in Washington, D.C. Before he was assassinated. He wanted to go to Nigeria to try to end the Civil War.
Then he spoke out against the Vietnam War.
He spoke out against the Vietnam War. He took immense criticism from white liberals.
Oh, they told him, they say, preacher, you get back in the pulpit. You got no business talking about the war. That's white folk business.
This is none of your business.
Right. Well, it's easy to, I guess the real issue here, Doc, is that we, for fear of being called black racists, sometimes we don't call a spade a spade. And I can remember being in Israel. Never will forget it. And the Israelis are very, very conscious about anti-Semitism, as well as our Jewish brothers and sisters here in the United States of America. They're never afraid that if you walk or if you decide to be critical or if you decide to challenge certain policies that they believe violate the interest of the Jewish community, they'll call you on it. And they will say it out loud, and they will say it over and over again. And if out loud doesn't work, they will say it in a way that makes you hurt. A lot of times and I think this is since Barack Obama got elected president, we are afraid these days to say when racism is apparent. And I think that in many instances we operate as if racism is over. Is racism over in this country?
Racism not over, and most black people know that. When we ask black people, is racism a major problem, 93% say yes. But we have gotten a lot more timid about saying so in public. We'll say so in our churches, we'll say so in our family reunions, we'll say so at the dinner table, we'll say so in the barbershop and beauty shops. But we need to get in people's faces again and say that ain't right, and we have to deal with it.
This is Leon Finney, and I'm on, this is Leon Finney. We're on WVON Talk Radio. We have with us our guest, Dr. Michael C. Dawson, and we're talking about blacks in politics. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Stick with us. And again, this is WVON Talk Radio. 773-591-1690 is our calling number. Thank you. Hi, this is Leon Finney, your host on Another Perspective. I had a caller, Brian, which showed up on our screen, but all of a sudden he disappeared. So, Brian, if you are there, please call back. We are dealing with today blacks in politics, and on this subject we have Dr. Michael C. Dawson, professor of political science at the University of Chicago. And he's written a book that I highly recommend. Get it. And it's called Not in Our Lifetime. And what it does is it lays out in clear, easy to read language and thought what has happened to the black community and why at this particular point we are not as strong as we once were. But in terms of getting public policy in place and helping to rebuild, because because of our past, we know how to make things happen. And there are more of us now than there were 20 years ago. And yet we are making less happen on behalf of our own people, our own children, and our own families than ever before in the history of our people in this country. And what he says is that there's a reason for why we were able to get so much done and why we were able to civilize, if you will, the United States of America and at this particular point, why we are not doing what we once did. And so what I want to do is I want to have him begin to talk a little bit about what we got to do. It's one thing to talk about what we ain't done, but it's another thing to talk about what we got to do.
If I had to use one word, I'd say organize. We used to be one of those organized.
Well, we got more people who call themselves community organized than ever before.
Yeah, well, you get a lot of people that call themselves businessmen, but they're not selling anything either.
Okay, all right. All right.
We have to organize. The businesses, black business people have to organize. People in the schools like me have to organize. And remember, St. Clair Drake was a great scholar.
Oh, yeah.
Who was organized us, organized the students to organize themselves, showed us the way to organize for black students. We have to organize, and we were talking about the black clubs in the last segment. We have to organize our block by block from bottom up. What we do too often is we get grants from foundation, go out and try to do a few things. I've done that myself. Sometimes we try to, or we have these national conferences, we're gonna organize the entire country. We have to organize where we are, and that's what we did before. And when all these different parts of the black community are organized, then we come together, we can make some noise.
Okay, all right, we're gonna take a caller. Brian?
Hello?
Yes, Brian?
Yeah, how you doing? I was listening to the conversation. I was driving. I had to pull over. I don't see what racism is hurting us that bad today. The problem with African Americans is you got a bad class divide among us. You know, we are unable to come together according to class. For instance, most educated blacks and non-educated blacks don't like each other, trust each other. When you look at other ethnic groups, like say if you look at the Asian community, one of them could grow up to be a doctor, and he'll reach back and pull 20 of them from his country within a 20-year lifetime, and they'll build a whole community together. Well, we run from each other when we make it.
All right, Brian. I'm going to ask Dr. Dawson to address that. Professor.
I agree with half of that. I do believe that we've grown apart on class quite a bit, and that makes it hard to organize. And when we do organize, it makes it harder for us to come together across these different economic divisions. And that's, well, I think particularly the black middle class doesn't realize that's hurting the black middle class. We're getting slammed in the jobs we have. We're not making the type of progress we should in these jobs. Our children are having problems in school and elsewhere. We need all of us to come together. We're not having as good life as sometimes we want to delude ourselves, we think. On the other hand, I also do think that racism is still a big problem in this country, whether it comes to getting jobs, loans, or the other type of particularly economic resources we need to be able to move ahead and fight on an equal ground in this highly competitive global economy that we have.
So what Brian raises the question. Brian, here's the thing. There's no question that blacks are not together. We're going to say that, and I've read enough of Dr. Dawson's book. He talks about the division between the black middle class, if you will, those who have and who don't have not. The question was, however, historically, we've been able to get past that. We've been able to get past some blacks have and some blacks not having. We've been able to get past that. We've done it before, and I think that we would talk about prescriptively, we can do it again. The real question is, I believe, the intent and the will to get it done. And let's go back just for a second about this, and I want to share this with you because I just happen to be a product of this community organizing movement. And my organization, when I started, when we started, was a dues-paying organization. We paid dues to found the Woodlawn organization. Every block club that was a member paid dues. We had $125 annual dues for over 100 block clubs. And then we raised money year in and year out to pay our own way. And so my point is, you can't look for the other folk to make you free. Freedom costs. And one of the things that Dr. King said, and I can remember this, you are not going to ride the train of freedom for free. You're going to have to pay for it every step of your way with your own money and with your own volunteer time and with your own sweat and blood. That's how we get free, and that's always been the way we could do it.
And that was an old lesson we had. The Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam made you pay for their newspaper.
That's right. They
said, this is worth something. You will be more knowledgeable if you read our paper, and you will pay for it. And if you belong to those organizations, you will get out there in the corner and
help sell the paper. Hey, this is Leon Finney, and we've got another caller, Ronnie. Ronnie?
Hi, this is Ronnie P. on the South Side. How you doing?
Okay, brother Ronnie.
Mr. Philly, I want to say something. I hope you understand what I'm saying. There's a large gap between late 60, early 70, then Martin Luther King, and then today, nothing. The Woodlawn organization was very good, and I believe for me, it's the one that I remember at the earliest time. But Mr. Finley, I want to say, I'm trying to use the right word. I don't like your politics, but I need your training. Are you understanding what I'm saying?
Well, I remember being told that some of the economic and mathematical tools I use in my professional research were white. And I said, this pencil's not white.
Woodlawn
We have to look.
organization was very good, I believe, for me.
Well, hold on. We're going to have to, Ronnie,
Yeah.
you got to ask a clear question, because we can't figure out where you're going. So let me try to do the best I can, Ronnie. I got other calls here, but the key thing is that we are here at this particular point to deal with racism in the United States of America, racism in the city of Chicago, and how racism has impacted black empowerment and how it impacts the fact that we don't have the power that we once had. It's very difficult at this particular point for us out of the city of Chicago to elect hardly anybody because we don't have enough voters here organized in order to hold our elected officials accountable. Our churches are a lot weaker than they used to be. Our block clubs are a lot weaker than they used to be. We have hardly any black businesses from one end of the State Street to the other one, from one end of Cottage Grove to the other one, from one end of King Drive to the other one. You go down 39th Street, 39th Street, 41st Street, 43rd Street, 47th Street, 51st Street, 55th Street, 61st Street, 63rd Street, 67th Street, 69th Street, 71st Street, 73rd Street, and 75th Street, 79th Street. Go down those streets and you can hardly find a black business. Something has gone wrong in the black community, and what we're trying to do is get a handle on what we're going to do and not get sidetracked in the stuff that ain't going to matter, my brother. Thank you so much, Ronnie.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, we have to use the tools we have. I mean, one of the good things about the move into higher education, there was a massive influx of black people into higher education as a result of the civil rights movement. One of the things that we can use is those skills that many of us picked up. We should be bringing them back like we said we would back in the day, and as we should tell our children to bring those skills back to build black businesses, to build black political organizations, to build black social organizations, and to build a movement eventually for justice in this country.
Yeah, and here's the thing. We've got Dr. Michael Dawson here with us, and he's an eminent scholar, and he's written a great book, and I'm pushing the book because I think that it's worth reading, and it's good. One of the things I say in my church as a pastor, I would not have my brothers and sisters ignorant. And that doesn't mean I'm calling anybody ignorant, but if we are uninformed about how we got to where we are and what to do to get out of this mess we're in, then it's our fault. And my sense is we've got to read, we've got to organize, and we've got to build a base of support in order to bring our people and our children into the 21st century. And it's just not happening. So I see Toussaint on the line. I'm going to go to Toussaint. Toussaint?
I wanted to thank you for a very interesting show. I had a question for the professor. He mentioned organizing, and particularly organizing sort of block by block and in the community. And I think one thing that has struck me, and somebody pointed this out to me earlier, is that a lot of times when we talk about organizing these days, folks rarely talk about organizing black folks as workers, and particularly organizing them in the workplace. And I noticed that the professor omitted that from his description of how people should be organizing, and I just wanted to ask the professor if he shared that observation and if he had any ideas in terms of how black folks could think about organizing themselves in their workplaces and what have you, and what do you think some of the consequences or outcomes of that might be?
Yeah, I hope my parents don't hear this, but I spent 10 years organizing workers and black workers in workplaces in California, Northern California. And what we did was we organized a black caucus. But as black workers, we worked in the union movement. I was a shop steward. I ended up on the negotiating team to get a new contract for all the workers in the plant I worked at. That's an integral part. One of the problems we have to recognize is that, yes, black workers should be organizing where they are with other workers for economic and justice and dignity, which is often what a lot of those shop floor fights are about. But you also have to recognize that too many black people have been totally disconnected from the labor market in this era, unlike when I was organizing in the 1970s and 1980s. So we also have to think about how do we organize to get people a meaningful economic life again, which was not a problem for my generation, certainly not for my parents' generation, but which is a serious problem for particularly many black males at this point. So we have to do both.
Yeah, and so nobody is saying Toussaint, the deal is not to organize. Wherever we are, we've got to organize. And then we've got to build a base of support, I think, hooking laborer to civic organizations, and so that we got a sense of organized labor, organized religion, organized business, organized parents, organized senior citizens, organized adults, whatever unit of organization we can put together, we got to do it. We don't have a choice, because at this particular point, things ain't getting no better, and we've got to stop blaming white folk for our own liberation, because they're not going to liberate us. I'm going to go to Brother Brandon now. Brandon?
How you doing, sir?
Yes.
Great. I think we should concentrate on one group of people. That in the group of people, we don't party with them, we don't go to church with them, we don't see them at the grocery store, and that's the Chinese nail shops. They in the community, they don't support the community, and they take the money out of the community. I think that would be one job stimulus package for the black women, just to open up their own nail shop.
All right, Brandon.
And when I get off work, I have a job. When I get off work, I buy my beer from a black-owned liquor store. And when I buy my beer, I pick up 3 Defenders. I support black businesses.
All right, well, I think, Brandon, you're talking. Let me let Dr. Dawson speak to that.
Thank you, Dr. Finney. Well, we have a long history of organizing against enterprises in our communities that exploit our communities. So I'm for that. It's been in St. Louis, it was sometimes black store owners that did the same thing. In Detroit, sometimes it was Arab store owners. There's been enough conflict between Jewish store owners and black communities in different places. In some places, it's been Asians as well. I think the basic point is, does an enterprise exploit the neighborhood? Does the enterprise give anything back to the neighborhood? If it doesn't, then organize.
Yeah.
I think we should boycott them. How can we do that? I would like to start a boycott group.
Well, here's the deal, Brandon. We're gonna have to be careful about talking about boycotts over the radio air. All right.
Okay.
You gotta. Yeah. No. You can do whatever you want to do. There's certain constitutional rights that we have as Americans, but we have to be very, very careful over the radio waves. FCC for one. This is a regulated station, so we have to make sure that we don't put things out there that we can't back up legally. But anyway, thank you so much for your call. I want to thank all of my callers. I've got one popping right here. Who is this on this line? Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Bob Chapman.
Okay.
No, don't pick that up.
Well, this is WVON. This is Leon Finney on WVON Talk Radio. We are now about to come to the end of our program. It's been a lively discussion. We have worked in order to bring about a sense of education to our African American brothers, as well as hopefully and sisters, as well as our white and Asian American brothers and sisters. This has been Leon Finney on Another Perspective, and we have had with us a very powerful and insightful member of the African American community, and he has helped us to understand what we need to do as black folk in order to be politically empowered. And it starts with you out there in Radio Land, organizing block by block, church by church, business by business. And when we do that, we'll be able to not only take back our community, we'll take back America. Now run and tell that